Welcome to God and Autobiography, the podcast. I'm Scott Langdon, and on this 282nd episode, Jerry Martin and I share what's on our mind with each other and with you. Together we delve a little more deeply into two of the topics brought to the front during this last unit of episodes, namely moral ambiguity and at-homeness. There's an earthly cost to every action, and we can never in this life escape this fundamental truth about being human in the world. At the same time, on a deeper level, we all have a desire to be at home, to feel a sense of at-homeness in our pursuit of purpose, truth, wisdom. Here's what's on our mind. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome back, everyone, to another What's on Our Mind. I'm Scott Langdon with Jerry Martin here, and this week we have a lot to talk about. These last few episodes, especially the ones, Jerry, where you and Abigail talked about moral ambiguity, is something that seems very timely right now, especially considering the state of affairs in the world, the state of affairs as the United States is concerned, for sure, where we live, and there are a lot of things that are popping up in our modern life where this subject of moral ambiguity and what do we do with it, how do we wrestle with it, it comes up a lot in our daily lives. It could be very easily expressed as something that we might all say, oh, of course, like, do we lie to the Nazis in order to protect the Jews? And Frank upstairs, do we hide? Oh, of course we do. Sure. All right. Well, let's bring it a little bit more to our modern day. Do we lie to the ICE agents to protect the most vulnerable among us? Some make the argument we do. Some make the argument we don't. Either way, it's an easy way to sort of frame it. But there are many more places of nuance within that where moral ambiguity is an issue.
Moral ambiguity has always been an issue, but it, depending on the culture at the time, it can be noticed or rather not noticed. I think in the era I grew up in, with the call it the age of the 50s, one of the things we were taught is obey the law. Mm-hmm. You know, one of your basic norms. And as a little kid, you're supposed to follow the rules, right? And I've once, I know, asked my own children when they were young, well, what if the rules are wrong? And they said, what do you mean? That's like saying, what if the rules of basketball are wrong? The rules of chess are wrong? What do you mean? These are the rules of the school. You know, the bell rings, you got to be in class. So anyway, there are times where we've lived in terms of fixed norms that seem just kind of clear to us. But we now live in a period where people go so far as to throw out all norms. They're all questionable. They're all no good for some reason or other. And then you lose moral ambiguity the other way because nothing matters if that's all made up. But we live in that in-between where there are, you might say, rules. There is right and wrong, and yet they aren't simple set of rules that you can put on your refrigerator with a magnet holding them in 1, 2, 3, 4. Every situation, you got to figure them out. Well, what's right here? And that's, in my view, that's daily life and always has been. But in our period, we're more open to noticing the ambiguities, I think.
I was thinking as I was preparing for today and to talk to you about this idea, George and Lenny from John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men came to my mind. That Lenny has done something that he's on the run for. And when they catch him, they will surely kill him. Yeah. And, you know, the character of Lenny is mentally challenged, and he knows what he did, but he didn't mean to do it. And it didn't come from any place of malice or any place of, evil at all. And yet he will surely be killed when they catch him. And George, his friend and companion, takes matters into his own hands and has this moral ambiguity, in the
Yeah.
right front and center. Do I take Lenny's life and spare him what will surely be a terrible end, so that Lenny won't even know, and he's torn with it. I'll be taking a life. And so that's a really sort of right out in front, right in your face situation. And we can go, oh, wow, what would I do in that situation? What would I do? I flash back also to a topic we've talked about a few episodes ago now, Abraham and his relationship with God. And when God says to Abraham, I want you to sacrifice your son on this altar, and Abraham says, here I am, Lord. Boy, is that moral ambiguity at its finest.
Right. God himself
Yeah.
tells Abraham, and the same God voice that led him to move his family out of where he was, or something, to a land that God will show him. And now, yikes. And I'd forgotten the backstory. His wife was way, way old, and they had not had any kids, and they
Mm-hmm.
pray or something, and God gives them this very child, as a kind of blessing or reward or something. And now he's supposed to go sacrifice this very child, and which for the larger story means, no, people of Israel. This would be, the story would start and stop with
Mm-hmm.
Abraham.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that, we talked about a lot of those lessons that come from that story. Um, Trust, faith, what those things mean. Um, and always we come back to the idea of being one with God, being in unity with God, and being in tune with God. We talk about it that way a lot. And in each case of moral ambiguity, where we have this choice, this decision where we know that the stakes are kind of high, or maybe sometimes we don't even realize how high the stakes might be. But we do know that while we are on earth, for sure, every action has a consequence that we will reverberate beyond what we could ever recognize. And, we can get paralyzed in that thought by thinking, oh, everything I do is I don't know if it's going to turn out right or wrong, and we never know how far. Yeah. Or we can rest in that and trust that there is a way of God and there's a way against God. I'm not comfortable with that language, but we do know that when God comes to earth in these stories, whether it be as Jesus in Christianity or in the episodes that where you talked about this, we talked about Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita and the stories of that, and how there's always, once you've done something, it's with you now. You can't unsee something, for example. It's in my consciousness now. It seems like once, God comes to earth, now there is this duality. Now there is actions have consequences. I'd like your thoughts on that idea of the reality of being a human, the reality of consequences, and how God connects to that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think as you're suggesting, Scott, it's extremely complicated. I was just trying to remember at some point, I think the theologian who was much more prominent when I was a kid, I don't hear his name much, Reinhold Niebuhr,
Mm.
At one point was saying something about every action involves faith, hope, and charity. And what he was saying was, you're never sure if what you're doing is the right thing, even in fairly trivial things, but especially where other people are involved, important human relationships are involved, or you're in an official role, so a whole institutional apparatus is involved. It might be the theater, for example, whatever it is, or the production company, larger entities are involved. And you have to have some kind of faith that, well, doing your best will be somehow okay. That, just do your best and it'll be okay. And the hope is that the faith has to do with somehow trusting your judgment, your own best judgment. The hope is that the consequences, which can be often the opposite of what you intended, that's very common, especially in public policy, the principle of unintended consequences. And the principle is that the unintended consequences are always greater than the intended consequences of an action. And I'm aware of this in medical things. You get they give you a medication for one purpose. Well, the medication doesn't know the purpose, and it affects your whole body. You're giving more sodium for one function, but it affects your whole body. And the ramifications of human action are like that. So he was saying you have to have some hope that these side effects, which can be beneficial, they're not always negative, but whatever they are, that they're okay, And I guess the charity probably means giving yourself and others some degree of kindness and latitude, and not, hitting people over the head if they seem to violate something, and and letting, you might say, not exaggerating small wrongs and making them, as if they were great wrongs. But anyway, those are some of the aspects that one has to take into account in this, what I always call this complex, messy world, the world that has uneven terrain. So you can't just glide straight across, but there are hills and valleys. And that means that a rule like tell the truth, well, that's fine in a flat world, you might say, but doesn't work at all where there are hills and valleys and many things you shouldn't be disclosing. You don't. If somebody asks you a yes or no answer where you're holding a secret, something you vowed to a friend not to tell anybody, well, you can't answer the yes or no question, or you've got to answer it wrongly. Because if you say, I can't answer that, that sort of does answer it. You're trying to protect a secret. So anyway, all of life is full of those ambiguities that we have to navigate. And something like, we talk a lot about spiritual discernment. This is a lot like a kind of moral discernment. Aristotle calls it practical wisdom. It's the wisdom of judgment in situations. And it involves not just a reasoning about the situation, but also, and the reason discernment seems right, some ability to see what's important about this situation, keeping the secret or telling the truth. And it probably varies from one case to another. Depends on what the nature of the secret. Did they commit a crime? And your priest, you heard it in confession, and they're going to do it more, from the confession. The Boston Strangler confesses, the Boston Strangler is going to strangle more, and maybe you violate the confidentiality of confession in such a case. Well, life is just full of these borderline decisions that in the rough terrain of reality.
Last week's episode, you spoke with Hans Legrand, and I just can't wait to read his book, first of all, because it sounds incredibly fascinating, something right up my alley, I think. And I really enjoyed working with that episode. One of the things that was interesting to me, his whole life is really interesting. He's a scientist who also did his Master's of Divinity at the same time, which is amazing. Either one of those two would knock you down, and any normal person.
He's a very smart guy, but this almost did him in.
Yeah. And he talked to you about going into the sciences, which he really enjoyed and but there was still another pull, another calling. We've talked about having a calling. What is that like? I know on your Substack, the question, I think the first question is, do you have a calling? Do you know what it feels like to have a calling? That idea of it. And he felt like looking for his calling toward God was getting this master's of divinity. And in each sort of step along the way of his spiritual story, what fascinated me the most is that he kept moving toward what was most open.
Mhm.
So he meets a girlfriend and she's Catholic. And so he goes to Catholicism and is sort of introduced to it and really enjoys it, really sees like, okay, there's really some good stuff in here. And yet he did not feel at home. He felt like he was just not quite there, and then eventually found the Unitarian tradition and felt, oh, there's openness here. I feel more at home here. And the term that popped out, I think you may have coined it, was at-homeness.
Yes,
And
yes.
I love that idea of feeling, having this sense of at-homeness.
Yeah, yeah. It's a basic thing of human nature. We're social animals. Man is a political animal. This is the opening statement of Aristotle's Politics, and it means man is a creature meant to live in the city. That's what it really meant, to live
Mm,
amongst other in a civilized setting with other people. And there's this yearning, which Hans describes as having seen with this Catholic family. It's not just Catholicism's oppressive faith and religion and so forth. It's visiting this Catholic girlfriend. This was a whole ethos, a kind of homely setting. And people need not just to float around in the world. He's very much after freedom, and you can be free just as an individual floating around in empty space. But that's not the whole of us. That's one human need is freedom to discover and to find and to appropriate what's to to find what fits us and what we can believe in and live by. But one also likes some kind of environment that supports your spiritual quest and supports the rest of your life. And
mm,
so Hans is constantly looking for that, finding it bits in different places. He often finds himself not at home.
mm.
And with the effort that the God Book led to, Theology Without Walls, when we started that organization, he found he was at home there also. But we need some kind of, and the at-homeness isn't just a home in the sense of a social niche, but that at-homeness expresses something deeper, in our existential makeup, that we want to not just have a niche, but we want a kind of deep sense of at-homeness where, ah, this is, I guess, where life makes sense for me. It's where I can relax and be myself. I can exhale and and still be comfortable, in other situations where you're not at home. You've got to kind of watch it. You can't just exhale and flop on the couch, you might say, your mental couch. You've got to, pay attention. What are the norms here and how you behave? But it's wonderful to find a place where uh, uh, it's almost like Aristotle thought his theory of gravity, based on what the knowledge of his day was, each object seeks its natural home. And so when you let go of the lead ball, its natural home is Earth. So it heads right down. When it reaches Earth, ah, it stops. It's at home. Anyway, we have to kind of, in a way, find, well, where is our natural home? And you could generalize for human beings, but it's many ways an individual quest because we're each so very different. So you have to figure out, well, where can you be at home?
Yeah, it seems like there are three layers maybe to this. I'll use the term layers as I was thinking of this. The one would be, and we'll start from the outside in. So the outside would be this social spectrum. Do I have a job where my coworkers are in line with my vision, and we get along, and we support each other, and it feels good to go to work and do my work. I feel that way. And then maybe the first layer in, so we'll call it the middle layer, might be, do I feel in this job like I'm doing my calling, my work in the world? So I'm doing my work in the world with these other folks who are supportive and have a very similar viewpoint. But then the most inner one might be that I'm at home anywhere, that wherever I am, it's God and me, and I'm at home in that sense, where I don't need anyone else to feel this sense of at homeness, and I can start here. And that sort of has happened to me in my career, in that I feel when I act that I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that while I'm also maybe driving for Lyft in between jobs, or if I'm speaking at a seminar somewhere, or if I'm working in retail, that I'm away from home at the time, right? It's just that I feel most at home, like, this is it, when I'm acting. And doing these other things like driving for Lyft or these other things, it's important to be there in that moment and do those things, but it also feels like, this doesn't quite feel like home. So you have to have things that don't quite feel like home in order to go, no, this is home. Yeah.
I suppose, yes.
Yeah. So you have to have the both. So when I'm on stage, I think, this is where I'm at home. Now, it doesn't mean everything's perfect. I know I can still, quote unquote, mess up, drop my lines or whatever. And also there's going to be this middle area of doing something that's important in the world. I think, telling stories is important. And then that outer layer of a cast and producers and people in the crew and all of us sort of having that same desire for the story that we're telling or the mission that we have, right? So this at-homeness starts for me in that inner level. And phrases, when I think about that come up in my have come up in my tradition, might be something like, give your troubles to God. I'm going to give it to God. Mm-hmm. Or, release this to the world or whatever. But when I think of, I'm going to give it to God, I understand the sentiment and the idea of it. But the more I think that through, the more I think, well, where else would I give it? I mean, who has it? You know what I mean? What does release it mean? And I think it just starts with that faith part, that as as the writer of Hebrews would say, and many think it's St. Paul, many think it's not, but in Hebrews, the author says faith is evidence of things unseen. So it's this place where we know God and I are, in a sense, one, when we talk about being, in union with God or in tune with God.
And where does that lead you? I kind of lost the thread, perhaps. It sounded as if at-homeness was going to be, first of all, you have to be at home with yourself. That sounded like one implication, Scott.
I don't think that they're linear. They have one and then the other. But I think when I think of being at home, and I had a wonderful home life growing up. And when I was at home with my parents and my two younger brothers, a number of those things happened. The outer layer of, here we all are together as a family, share the same name, share the same, our parents are raising us the same way, essentially. And then there's this place where I felt comfortable being able to go after the things that felt important. My parents supported me. My brothers supported me. So when I became an actor, it wasn't like, you shouldn't go into that. You should be a doctor instead. I had a family, so that middle layer. And ultimately, I guess those two things uh, facilitated the most inner work, which was I have the freedom from these external circumstances. They have showed me I have this freedom all along to be able to pursue God's will, God's work anywhere, anytime. I don't need to do anything in order to be worthy. I am because God created me. But I realized that because I was at home, and a lot of people don't have that at homeness. Maybe they were raised in a family that restricted them in ways or whatever, and they felt they couldn't be free. Hans, you said, he uses that term a lot. It's not a place that you get to of freedom. I think it's a place that you already are, and these other things get released from you. They're piled on you, the pressures of the world or what have you, and you realize that once those are released, what's left is you and God, free.
Yeah, that's interesting. I come at it so differently because I have so different a life. As a child, I ran away from home all the time. I was so glad I liked school so much because you got to go out of home. You got to leave home. My home life was a place that was problematic, even though my parents were perfectly nice people, but it can be problematic in deeper ways. My younger brother died when I was a child. After that, my mother was not available to be a mother anymore. She was absorbed in her own grief for the rest of her life, you might say. Every time she'd see like a Gerber's baby commercial when I was in high school, she would tear up and start crying from this lost, I think, 13-week-old, just a little baby. I'm not sure. I was a child at the time of the incident. And then my father was father to my mother after that. She was the one who he was taking care of. So I was just on my own. And my mother also happened to lack empathy and to be hypercritical. And so I needed to get away from that hypercriticism. I went to school, and if you got the answers right, you got 100% and so forth. There was no hypercriticism. Somehow with my mother, you never got it right. There was always she would always find the flaw or one way to criticize anything you said or did. Well, that's a rough environment. And I certainly have the notion of at-homeness. And I think a lot of my life is happy now, being married to Abigail. I'm completely at home with her. And I'm also a deep introvert. An introvert is rather at home with his own thoughts and feelings. And so I have, when I was writing Radically Personal, that was intensely enjoyable because I'm, the way you're called to act, you're doing the right thing when you're acting. And that's the fulfillment of Scott in a way, is being in that role. And this is the fulfillment of Jerry, is thinking, well, what's on Jerry's mind? And then what follows from that? And how does that relate to something else Jerry cares about? And so on. That's very deep at-homeness. And I think you're right to bring it in. And Hans brings it in this connection, is the notion of a calling. You're doing what you're meant to do, however one wants to interpret that. In doing the God book, that's a calling. It does not involve at-homeness for me.
Right.
It's wonderful having God's company, but I'm called upon as a deep introvert to do things like this very program that are very extrovert oriented, to start the whole project, to go to the American Academy of Religion, where I know nobody and it's not my field. Everyone in the room knows more about religion than I do. And yet I've got divine guidance to start a theological project called Theology Without Walls. And so I just start this deep introvert introducing myself to people, getting to know them so that I can then pull together a group and get the thing started. And it's gone very well. It's flourished, I would say. It's kind of somewhat I've been told, making theological history. In part, I think, because even if I hadn't come up with it, someone else would. God would have tapped someone else on the shoulder to get it going. It's the project natural to our times, where we're so aware of the multiplicity of religions and sources of spiritual insight that you can't just stay hammering out Lutheran doctrine or something like that. Uh, so anyway, this is going to mean something different for each person. And if they stay in tune with God, I mean, that's a kind of at-homeness, just in tune with God, because that's your ultimate reality in your life. It's the essential reality, the inner stuffing of yourself, your deepest soul is completely in harmony with God, and you've got to try to actualize that in your daily life. And then there's a kind of deep at-homeness there. You're doing the right thing. And so I have that. And I think anyone who has probably a deeply spiritual life has that kind of inner peace. They often talk about it as a kind of peace, and at-homeness is very much like, where do you find peace? Home is the place of peace. And so for each, your story is different. My story is my own story. It's not the same for everybody. Uh, and yet for each person, there's some version of that story where they find at-homeness, where they find peace, where they can relate best to the divine. And a lot of our life journey is where to find our own best access to the divine. And there are all different kinds of answers. It can be high on the Himalaya mountains, or it can be down in the inner city, or anywhere in between. It can be Harvard Yard, where we find it, where a given individual finds it. And that's a lot of the task of life, is to find out, you might say, not just what is your calling, but where do you belong?
God talks to you a time or two about places where God is more present than other places, that kind of a feeling is actually a real thing. So perhaps it might be on a mountaintop. Perhaps it might be the birth of a baby or the death of a loved one. In those moments, we feel God's presence more. Well, that's a thing. Yeah. And at the same time, I got caught up and sometimes still struggle with the idea that I will get to a place where I'm one with God. But until I do, I have to work things out. I have to get my prayer life straight. I have to do enough this, that, or the other. And then I'll be one with God again. And then I'll be ready to live life. And you're never going to get there. You're never going to find peace. It's not going to be just around that corner, or as soon as I do this act of service, or as soon as I fast for this long, I will find peace. However, I do find that in certain practices, I feel more aligned with, this is a God direction and this isn't. So maybe, I don't know, certain thoughts that are negative thoughts about somebody else, or, looking at something on the internet that it might be inappropriate or something. All of those things are aligned with a feeling that's just, this is off for me. Whereas spending my time focusing on other things that are aligned with what feels like God's purpose, those two feelings are distinct. Those two paths seem really, even though there's subtlety in there, they do seem different. God's way, not God's way. I was going to say my way, but ultimately, God's way and my way are the same way. I mean, God says that at bottom, everything is God's way, right? So just when I think about that, and coming from my perspective and my story, when I think about this idea of at-homeness, I always resist the notion that you're going to get it someday. Mm-hmm. You already are at home. As soon as you just take that in, I am at home, because God and I are already in unity. We already are in tune. And I understand that we deviate and we come back, but when I let go of those thoughts, I let go of the judgment on myself. Oh, you didn't do this right. You need to do it this way. When I let go of that and just sit with where I am, I realize, okay, There's nothing you can do for salvation. There's nothing you can do to get it right in this ultimate way. And yet, the more I contemplate that and think about that, the more I feel like I'm being led to do it right. The next right thing feels like the next right thing. It's not a big choice. Ooh, do I steal from this person or do I say hello to them and wish them good luck? Seems like an easy choice. Well, all of the things in a way almost seem like an easy choice. Difficult for sure. Then that's the struggle, isn't it? I may not want to do this one thing because I have desires after all. We're beings with desires. Yeah.
Yeah. Life is full of temptations. And, a lot of what you're describing, Scott, sounds to me like, you're at one with God. There's this funny sense in which God is sort of everything. There's nothing that you might say that where God, there's no part of reality that God is absent from. God, and it's not just God is hanging around there. God sort of, in some sense, is each of these things. You look at a little turtle going across. That turtle also is divine. Has God, is part of the divine reality that encompasses everything, that includes everything, and yet there is this other sense. I call one the ubiquitous sense of the divine, where the divine is everywhere, and the other a kind of differential sense of God, because God also actualizes God's self in a more personal and distinctive form, and can be more present one place than another. And that would apply to inside each of us. Some certain aspects of yourself are, you might say, more godly, more divine than other aspects of oneself. And a lot of that, a lot of those quotations from God and Autobiography, where we and God are at one, it's really our soul and God are at one. And it's not that easy for human beings to get to the soul level. It's not, the soul level has no desire to steal from someone or even look at dirty pictures. The soul level, these are trivial and of no interest. And if at the soul level, you talk about at-homeness, you and God are just, sitting by the fireplace together, you might say. You couldn't be more, I think the Jews say Hamish, the Germans say Heimlich, but more home-like than that. And so a lot of life is to keep in touch with that soul level. And that doesn't require, it can be aided by prayer, meditation, walks in the woods, good music, and many other things. It can be aided, and of course, a good life partner or good friends. These can all help you be more in touch with your most fundamental level of reality. And so you cling to those things. You make the most of them in your life, and you make the least possible of the other things. The greed and lust and jealousy and envy and all of those things are also part of very much part of the mix of human nature that makes it all kind of interesting, that drives the plot of life. Our lives are very dramatic, but the life of the soul is not quite as dramatic, and yet you've got to make sure it doesn't get lost in the froth on the surface of life.
I'm so glad we can talk together, Jerry. This is always such a treat for me.
Okay, well, good to talk with you, Scott, and be well.
Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with episode 44. You can read the original true story In the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography is Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at godandautobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.